The cicadas screamed their summer song as Sarah Miller pulled her dusty Ford pickup into the gravel driveway of her childhood home. The two-story farmhouse stood like a decaying sentinel against the vast Oklahoma sky, its white paint peeling in the relentless sun. It had been 15 years since she'd set foot on this property, 15 years of building a life in Chicago, far away from the whispers that had followed her family for generations. "You sure about this?" her husband Mark asked, squinting through the windshield at the dilapidated structure. "We could still turn around, get a hotel in Oklahoma City." Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. "My grandmother is dead. I have to handle the estate." The words came out more harshly than she intended. "Sorry, it's just being back here." Their 7-year-old daughter Lily peered out from the back seat, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Is this where you grew up, Mom?" Sarah caught her daughter's gaze in the rearview mirror. "For a while, honey, with great-grandma Eliza." What Sarah didn't say was how she'd fled this place at 18, swearing never to return to the family property where 3 generations of Millers had lived and died under circumstances the locals in nearby Blackwell still discussed in hushed tones. As they stepped out of the car, the late July heat hit them like a physical force. The sprawling property stretched out before them, 50 acres of mostly fallow fields, a weathered barn in the distance, and a cluster of oak trees surrounding a small family cemetery. "The lawyer said the power and water should be on," Mark said, grabbing their bags from the trunk. "How long do you think we'll need to stay?" "Week, maybe 2, Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the barn. "There's a lot to go through." They made their way up the creaking porch steps. Sarah hesitated at the door, her hand trembling slightly as she inserted the key the lawyer had mailed her. The lock turned with a reluctant groan. The smell hit her first, musty and familiar, a blend of old wood, dust, and something else she couldn't quite name. Memories flooded back. Her grandmother's stern face, the strict rules, the hidden rooms, the strange sounds at night. "It's bigger than I expected," Mark commented, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence as they entered the dim foyer. Sarah nodded absently, her attention caught by the photographs lining the hallway wall. Her mother as a teenager, her grandmother as a young woman, her great-grandfather standing proudly in front of the newly built barn in 1923, the legacy of the Miller family, preserved in fading black and white. What the photographs didn't show were the rumors, the whispers about her great-grandfather's sudden death, her grandmother's peculiar methods of raising children, the unexplained disappearances of farmhands over the decades. "Can I explore?" Lily asked, already halfway up the stairs. "No," Sarah snapped, then softened her tone. "No, honey. Let Daddy and me check the house first. Some of the floors might not be safe." As Mark took Lily to find a bathroom, Sarah wandered into the kitchen. It was eerily preserved, as if her grandmother had just stepped out momentarily. A coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink. The ancient refrigerator hummed loudly. On the kitchen table lay an open Bible, a pair of reading glasses perched atop it. Sarah approached cautiously, noticing that the Bible was open to the book of Leviticus. Her grandmother had underlined several passages about blood and family purity. In the margin, in her grandmother's cramped handwriting, were the words, "Sarah will return when I'm gone. She must know the truth." A sudden bang from upstairs made her jump. "Mark?" she called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. No answer. "Mark? Lily?" Sarah moved toward the stairs, her heart pounding. The floorboards above creaked as if under the weight of footsteps. But the footsteps weren't moving toward the stairs, they were heading toward the room Sarah remembered all too well. Her old bedroom, the one with the hidden door to the attic. The room where she'd heard those whispers night after night as a child. "The bloodline must remain pure," the voices had said. "The Miller way must continue, Mom." Lily's voice broke through Sarah's rising panic. Her daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, her face bright with excitement. "There's a room up here with toys. Old toys." Sarah exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. "Lily, don't wander off, okay? Where's Daddy?" "Checking the other rooms. The toilet works," Lily reported proudly. Mark appeared behind their daughter, a puzzled expression on his face. "Sarah, there's something odd up here. Come look." Sarah climbed the stairs hesitantly, each step bringing back memories she'd spent years trying to forget. The upstairs hallway was just as she remembered, 4 doors, all closed except for the bathroom. At the end of the hall hung a portrait of Eliza Miller, Sarah's grandmother, her stern eyes seeming to follow visitors. "What did you find?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mark led her to what had been her grandmother's bedroom. The heavy oak furniture remained unchanged, the 4-poster bed with its handmade quilt, the dresser with the oval mirror, the rocking chair by the window. But Mark wasn't looking at any of these. He was staring at the wall beside the closet. Is this normal? He asked, pointing to a series of marks etched into the wallpaper. Sarah stepped closer, her blood running cold. Names and dates, dozens of them, scratched into the floral pattern with what must have been a knife or razor. At the bottom, freshly carved, Sarah returns, July 2025. She knew I was coming, Sarah whispered, her fingers hovering over her name. But how? The lawyer only contacted me after she died. Maybe she left instructions, Mark suggested, though he looked unsettled. What are all these other names? Sarah scanned the wall. Family members, births, deaths, marriages. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed a pattern. Mark, these aren't just dates. Look at the spacing between them. The names were arranged in clusters, connected by thin lines. Not a family tree. Something else. Something that made Sarah's skin crawl as understanding dawned. Breeding records, she murmured. Like you'd keep for livestock. Mark stared at her. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, Lily called from down the hall. Mom, I found a doll that looks just like me. Sarah rushed to her old bedroom, where Lily sat on the faded pink bedspread, holding a cloth doll with button eyes and yellow yarn hair, just like Lily's blonde locks. Where did you find that? Sarah demanded, perhaps too sharply. Lily pointed to the closet. In there. There's a whole box of dolls. Sarah approached the closet cautiously. Inside on the floor sat a cardboard box filled with handmade dolls, each crafted to resemble different children. With trembling hands, Sarah lifted one that was unmistakably modeled after herself as a child. Same brown hair, same blue dress she'd worn in elementary school. We should go, Sarah said, suddenly backing away from the closet. We can come back tomorrow. Maybe stay in town instead. Mark frowned. After we just got here? Sarah, what's going on? A loud thud from above made them all look up. Something was moving in the attic. Probably raccoons, Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. Sarah shook her head. The attic was always kept locked. Grandmother said it wasn't safe. Well, something's up there now, Mark replied. He turned to Lily. Stay here with Mom, I'll check it out. No. Sarah grabbed his arm. Don't, please. The look Mark gave her was part confusion, part concern. Sarah, you're scaring me a little. It's just an old house settling. Another thud, followed by what sounded distinctly like footsteps. The ladder to the attic is in my grandmother's bedroom closet, Sarah said quietly. But I'm begging you, Mark, don't go up there. Not tonight. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the gaps in the old windows. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the farmland. Let's at least unpack the car and get some dinner, Mark suggested. Everything looks different in daylight. As they headed downstairs, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not just by the portrait of her grandmother, but by something else, something hidden within the walls of the house where generations of Millers had kept their secrets. Secrets that had begun in that barn nearly a century ago, with a birth that should never have happened. Dinner was a tense affair of sandwiches made from supplies they'd brought in a cooler. No one wanted to open the ancient refrigerator, despite its persistent humming. They ate at the kitchen table, carefully avoiding the Bible that still lay open to Leviticus. So this is where you grew up? Mark asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. You never really talked much about it. Sarah picked at the crust of her bread. From 8 to 18. After my parents died, the car accident, Mark nodded. He knew that much, at least Sarah's parents had died in a crash on Route 177 when she was a child. That's what everyone was told, Sarah said quietly, then glanced at Lily, who was busy drawing on a paper napkin. We'll talk later, after dinner. They settled Lily in a small bedroom that had once belonged to a distant cousin who'd briefly lived with them. Sarah avoided putting her in her old room, making an excuse about better air circulation. When Lily was finally asleep, Mark and Sarah sat on the porch steps, the night air thick with humidity and the constant chorus of crickets. In the distance, the dark silhouette of the barn stood against the starry sky. Now tell me what's really going on, Mark said, his voice low. You've been on edge since we arrived. Sarah took a deep breath. There's a reason I never brought you here. A reason I changed my name when I left for college. I thought that was because you didn't get along with your grandmother. Sarah laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. The Miller family has a history in this county. Not a good one. She pointed toward the barn. It started there. In 1923, my great-grandfather Thomas Miller built that barn with his own hands. He was a widower with a 17-year-old daughter, Ruth, my grandmother's mother. The story that was passed down. The one my grandmother told me was that Ruth gave birth in that barn, unmarried, father unknown. That baby was my grandmother, Eliza. Mark frowned. That was scandalous back then, but hardly unique. It gets worse, Sarah continued. Thomas raised Eliza as his own, but isolated her from the community, Homeschooled her. When she was 16, she had a baby, my mother, Catherine. Again, no father was ever mentioned. When my mother was 15, she had me. 3 generations of teenage mothers. No fathers in the picture. Mark's expression changed as understanding dawned. You're not suggesting ... the county records are vague. Birth certificates list unknown for the fathers. But the rumors in town, they said the Miller women never left the farm for long enough to meet men. They said Thomas started something that continued for generations. That's why I left, why I changed my name, why I never came back until now. Mark was silent for a long moment. Have you ever done a DNA test to confirm or rule this out? Sarah shook her head. I've been too afraid of what I might find. A sudden noise from inside the house made them both turn. A door slamming, or perhaps a window. Just the wind, Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. They went back inside, checking on Lily, who was sleeping peacefully. As they prepared for bed in the master bedroom, Sarah refused to sleep in her old room. Mark asked, "What about the attic?" "What's up there?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "It was always locked. Grandmother said it was unsafe, but sometimes at night I'd hear noises. Movements. Once, I thought I heard crying." "Tomorrow we open it," Mark said firmly. "If we're going to sort through this house, we need to see everything." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "There's something else. The lawyer mentioned a safe deposit box at the Blackwell Bank. Grandmother left specific instructions that I was to open it. What do you think is in it?" "I don't know. But given everything else, ... nothing good." They lay in bed, the unfamiliar mattress creaking beneath them. The wind continued to howl outside, branches scratching against the window panes like skeletal fingers. Just as Sarah was drifting off to sleep, she heard it, a soft thud from above, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crossing the attic floor. "Mark," she whispered, shaking her husband. "Listen." They both lay still, holding their breath. The footsteps stopped directly above their bed. Then came a sound that made Sarah's blood freeze, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like someone rocking in a chair. "Tomorrow," Mark whispered, "we find out what's up there, and then we decide if we're staying." In her dreams that night, Sarah was a child again, listening to her grandmother's stories about family legacy and the importance of bloodlines, about how the Millers were special, chosen for a purpose. In the dream, her grandmother led her toward the barn, saying, "One day you'll understand the sacrifice. The Miller way must continue." Sarah woke with a start at dawn, her heart pounding. Beside her, Mark was still sleeping. Careful not to wake him, she slipped out of bed and went to the window. In the early morning light, she could see the family cemetery clearly, a dozen weathered headstones under the oak trees, and walking among them, a tall figure in a dark dress. A figure that looked exactly like her grandmother, who had supposedly died 2 weeks ago at the age of 97. Sarah blinked hard, convinced her eyes were playing tricks on her. When she looked again, the cemetery was empty, the headstones standing in silent vigil under the oak trees. Had she imagined it? The line between dreams and reality felt dangerously thin in this house. She dressed quickly and crept downstairs, careful not to wake Mark or Lily. The kitchen was cold despite the summer heat outside, as if the house retained the chill of its secrets. Sarah made coffee using the ancient percolator, her grandmother's preferred method. Modern conveniences like drip coffee makers had been dismissed as wasteful nonsense by Eliza Miller. As the coffee brewed, Sarah noticed something she'd missed the previous evening, a stack of leather-bound journals on the highest shelf, partially hidden behind mason jars filled with dried herbs. Her grandmother had always been writing in those journals, but they were strictly off-limits to Sarah as a child. Using a chair to reach them, Sarah pulled down the topmost volume, the most recent, she presumed. The leather was worn smooth from handling, the pages filled with her grandmother's distinctive handwriting, cramped and precise. The first entry was dated just 3 months ago. March 12, 2025, the doctor says it's cancer, inoperable. I have perhaps months, not years. The question of secession becomes urgent now. Sarah must be contacted, but not yet. Preparations must be made first. The attic must be secured. The records must be in order. I have watched her from afar. The internet makes this possible, even for an old woman like me. She has a child, a girl. The bloodline continues, though diluted by the outsider she married. Still, the Miller gift may manifest. It often skips generations. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the pages, skimming entries that detailed her grandmother's decline and her apparent obsession with the secession. Repeatedly, her grandmother mentioned the gift in the Miller way, phrases Sarah remembered from childhood but had never fully understood. Then, an entry from just weeks before her grandmother's death caught her attention. June 30th, 2025. It is nearly time. Sarah must return to claim her inheritance. The land, the house, the knowledge, all must pass to her. I have left instructions with Harmon at the bank. The box contains everything she needs to understand. Thomas watches me from the attic. He is displeased with my failure to properly prepare Sarah. He says I was too harsh, that I drove her away. Perhaps he is right, but she will return now. She must. The barn awaits the next generation. Sarah closed the journal, her mouth dry despite the coffee. Thomas, her great-grandfather, who had died in 1965, long before Sarah was born, watching from the attic. The implications made her skin crawl. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Mark's arrival. He found Sarah sitting rigid at the kitchen table, the journal open before her. "You're up early," he noted, pouring himself coffee. "What's that?" "Grandmother's journal," Sarah replied, her voice hollow. "Mark, we need to go to the bank today, and then we need to open that attic." Mark read the passage she indicated, his expression growing more troubled with each line. "Sarah, this sounds like the ramblings of a woman suffering from terminal cancer and possibly dementia. Your great-grandfather couldn't have been in the attic." "I know what it sounds like," Sarah said. "But what if what? Ghosts." "What if what? Ghosts? You don't believe in that stuff?" Sarah shook her head. "Not ghosts." She struggled to articulate the growing dread that had settled in her chest. "When I was a teenager, local boys would sometimes dare each other to sneak onto our property at night. Once I heard screaming. Grandmother said a boy had fallen from a tree while trespassing, but you didn't believe her? The sheriff came out the next day. I overheard him talking to grandmother about keeping it contained and maintaining the arrangement. The boy was never mentioned again. No missing persons report, nothing in the newspaper." Mark sat down heavily. "You think your grandmother was, hurting people?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I do know that 3 generations of Miller women had children without ever leaving this farm for extended periods. I know my grandmother kept the attic locked and forbade anyone from entering the barn except during harvest. And I know that people in town crossed the street when we walked by." Before Mark could respond, Lily bounded into the kitchen, already dressed and full of the energy only a 7-year-old could muster at 7 a.m. "Can we explore today?" she asked eagerly. "I want to see the barn." Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. "Actually, honey," Sarah said carefully, "we need to go into town this morning. Maybe this afternoon we can look around more. But I want to see where the dolls came from," Lily insisted. "There's a whole workshop in the barn," the doll told me. Sarah froze. "What doll? What did it tell you?" Lily looked confused by her mother's intensity. "The doll that looks like me. I had a dream that she was talking to me. She said great-great-grandpa Thomas makes dolls in the barn for all the Miller children. She said he's waiting to meet me." Mark's face paled. "Lily, that was just a dream. Dolls don't talk, and your great-great-grandpa Thomas died a long time ago. But the doll said he's still here," Lily insisted. "She said he lives in the attic and watches over the family." Sarah stood abruptly. "Get your things. We're going into town now," as they prepared to leave. Sarah noticed something that sent a chill through her. The Bible on the kitchen table was now closed, the reading glasses neatly folded on top. She was certain neither she nor Mark had touched it. Outside, the Oklahoma sun beat down mercilessly as they walked to the car. Sarah couldn't help but glance at the barn, its weathered doors firmly shut against the morning light. For a moment she thought she saw movement in one of the small, high windows, a pale face watching their departure. But when she looked again, there was nothing there but shadows. The town of Blackwell hadn't changed much in 15 years. Main Street still featured the same storefronts, though some businesses had changed hands. The old movie theater was now an antique mall. The diner where Sarah had occasionally been allowed to eat had a new sign with the same worn booths, visible through the windows. What had changed was how people reacted to her. As they walked from their parking spot to the Blackwell Bank and Trust, Sarah noticed people stopping to stare. An elderly man crossing the street did a visible double-take. A woman coming out of the pharmacy actually gasped. "They recognize you," Mark murmured, his hand protectively on Sarah's back. "It's a small town, and I look like my mother and my grandmother." Sarah kept her eyes fixed ahead, her pace quickening. Inside the bank, the air conditioning was a welcome relief from the July heat. A middle-aged woman at the customer service desk glanced up, her professional smile faltering when she saw Sarah. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm Sarah Miller. I need to access a safe deposit box left by my grandmother, Eliza Miller." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. Mr. Harmon is expecting you. Let me get him." As they waited, Lily explored the small lobby, fascinated by the vintage vault door on display. Mark leaned closer to Sarah. "They knew you were coming." Grandmother's lawyer probably called ahead, Sarah reasoned, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Lawrence Harmon, the bank manager, was a portly man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His face registered shock when he saw Sarah, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Ms. Miller, thank you for coming in. My condolences on your grandmother's passing." He extended his hand, which Sarah shook briefly. "If you'll follow me, we can access the safe deposit box privately." In a small conference room, Harmon produced a large envelope. "Before I bring the box, your grandmother left specific instructions. You're to read this letter first. Alone." Mark frowned. "We're family." Harmon shook his head apologetically. "Miss Eliza was very clear. Sarah alone first. Then she can share as she sees fit." Sarah nodded. "It's fine, Mark. Why don't you take Lily to get some ice cream? There's a parlor down the street." After they left, Harmon handed Sarah the envelope. "I'll return with the box when you've finished reading." The letter inside was handwritten on thick stationery, the script instantly recognizable as her grandmother's. "Sarah, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world, though perhaps not entirely. The Miller family has never fully embraced death, as you will soon understand. By now you've returned to the farm. You've seen the house, perhaps noticed the changes since you left. What you don't yet comprehend is your role in what must continue. The Millers have a covenant, Sarah, one made by my grandfather Thomas in 1923. He was a man of great ambition but limited means. The farm was failing. His daughter, my mother Ruth, was sickly. In desperation, he sought unusual means of salvation. In the barn, on the winter solstice of 1923, Thomas Miller made a pact with something he believed was an angel. It promised prosperity, health, and long life for the Miller bloodline in exchange for devotion and sacrifice. The first sacrifice was the purity of the bloodline itself. The angel demanded that the Millers remain untainted by outside blood. Thomas, in his desperation and perhaps madness, interpreted this in the most literal way possible. I was born of that interpretation. As was your mother, as were you. But the covenant brought what was promised. Our land remained fertile when others failed. Disease rarely touched our family, and death, true death, became something different for the Millers. The box contains the original document signed by Thomas, the ritual objects he used, and instructions for maintaining the covenant. The choice now falls to you, Sarah. You can walk away, break the chain that has bound our family for generations. The consequences of that choice will be yours to bear. Or you can embrace your inheritance. Return to the barn on the coming solstice. Continue what Thomas began. The attic key is in the box. Thomas waits there, as he has since his body failed him in 1965. He will guide you, if you choose to listen. Whatever you decide, remember this. The Miller blood in your veins and in your daughters is powerful beyond your understanding. The gift may manifest regardless of your choice. Your grandmother, Eliza Sarah, sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands. The implications were too horrific to fully process. Her family history, already troubling, had just revealed itself to be far more sinister than she'd imagined. When Harmon returned with a rectangular metal box, Sarah was still staring at the letter. "Miss Miller, are you all right?" he asked, setting the box on the table. Sarah looked up, her face pale. "Mr. Harmon, did you know my grandmother well?" He hesitated. "The Harmons have handled the Millers' banking since 1924, my father before me, his father before him." "Then you know about the dot arrangement." Harmon's expression became guarded. "Blackwell has always had an understanding with the Miller family. We don't interfere with Miller business. In return, the town prospers. Crops don't fail. Illnesses pass us by." "That's superstition," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Perhaps." Harmon placed a key on the table beside the box. "But I recall the year you left, 2010. The worst drought in county history followed. The cancer rate tripled. The mill closed. Some said the Miller blessing had been withdrawn because you broke the chain." He stepped back toward the door. "Take as much time as you need. The box is yours now." Left alone, Sarah stared at the metal container for several long minutes before inserting the key with trembling fingers. Inside lay several items. A leather-bound book much older than her grandmother's journals. A small wooden box containing what appeared to be human teeth. A tarnished silver key that must be for the attic. And a folded document on parchment-like paper, sealed with red wax bearing an unfamiliar symbol. Sarah picked up the document cautiously, breaking the seal. The handwriting was different from her grandmother's, older, more formal. The date at the top read December 21st, 1923. The text began, "I, Thomas Miller, do hereby pledge my bloodline to the service of the angel of the harvest, who has appeared to me in my hour of need, ... double quotes." Sarah couldn't bring herself to read further. She returned the document to the box and closed the lid firmly, feeling tainted just from touching it. When Mark and Lily returned, Sarah was waiting in the bank lobby, the metal box clutched tightly under her arm. "Did you get what you needed?" Mark asked, searching her face. Yes, Sarah replied, her voice strangely calm. And now we need to go back to the farm. There's something in the attic I have to see. The drive back to the farm was silent except for Lily's occasional comments about the ice cream she'd enjoyed. Sarah stared out the window, the metal box secure on her lap, her mind racing with impossible thoughts. Mark kept glancing at her worriedly but didn't press for details. As they turned onto the gravel road leading to the farm, Sarah finally spoke. I need you to take Lily into town this afternoon. Get a room at the motel. Mark frowned. What? Why? I have to do something here. Alone. Sarah's voice was flat, determined. After everything you've told me? Not a chance. Mark's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Whatever this is, we face it together. You don't understand. This isn't just about discovering family secrets anymore. It's about ending them. Sarah turned to look at her husband, her expression fierce. I won't expose Lily to what's in that house, to what might be in that attic. Before Mark could argue further, they pulled up to the farmhouse. Standing on the porch as if waiting for them was an elderly man in overalls, the caretaker from the neighboring property. That's Earl Jenkins, Sarah said, surprised. He must be nearly 90 now. They got out of the car and Earl approached slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. Quote, his weathered face broke into a smile when he saw Sarah. Well, You came back after all. His voice was rough with age but warm. Your grandmother said you would. You knew my grandmother well? Sarah asked, keeping Lily partially behind her. Earl nodded. Helped maintain the property for 50 years. Your grandmother hired me after Thomas retired to the house permanently. He gave Sarah a meaningful look. She told me you might need some guidance when you returned. Mark stepped forward. What kind of guidance? Earl looked Mark up and down appraisingly. You'd be the husband. Outsider blood. He said it without judgment, merely stating a fact. The Miller women always did what needed doing, even when it wasn't pretty. Mr. Jenkins, Sarah said carefully, what do you know about the attic? About what's up there? The old man's expression grew solemn. Thomas Miller was a good man who made a terrible choice. What remains of him isn't good or terrible, it just is. A reminder of the price of desperation. Is he alive up there? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Earl shook his head. Not in the way you'd think of living, but not gone either. The Miller way preserves what should pass on. Lily tugged at Sarah's sleeve. Mom, who's the lady in the barn? All three adults turned to look at the child, then toward the barn in the distance. The doors were still firmly shut. What lady, sweetie? Mark asked, his voice carefully controlled. The one watching us through the window, Lily pointed. She was there when we drove up, but she went inside when we started talking. Earl's face paled. That'd be Ruth, most likely. Thomas's daughter. Your great-grandmother, he added, looking at Sarah. She prefers the barn. Always has, since 1923. Sarah felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. Mark, take Lily to town now. Mark hesitated, torn between protecting his daughter and staying with his wife. Sarah, I don't think, please, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I need to know you're both safe while I deal with this. I'll call you tonight, I promise. Eventually Mark relented, though his reluctance was evident as he led a protesting Lily back to the car. We'll get a room at the Blackwell Motor Lodge. Call me the moment anything feels wrong. After they drove away, Sarah turned to Earl. Tell me everything you know. The truth, not the stories told to scare children. Earl sighed heavily. Let's sit on the porch. This isn't a quick telling. On the wooden porch swing, Earl recounted what he knew of the Miller history. How Thomas Miller, desperate to save his failing farm during the economic downturn of the early 1920s, had turned to increasingly esoteric solutions. There was a traveling preacher back then, Earl explained. Not the regular Christian kind. He dealt in older faiths, promised miracles for the right price. Thomas was desperate, truth was sickly, the crops were failing. The bank was threatening foreclosure. The preacher told Thomas about entities that could be called upon at certain times, in certain places. Powerful beings that could grant prosperity, health, long life, but they required sacrifice. Human sacrifice? Sarah asked, horrified. Earl shook his head. Nothing so simple. They required devotion, generations of it. Blood, continuity. And they extended life beyond natural limits. The first ritual was performed in the barn on the winter solstice of 1923. Thomas and Ruth participated together. What exactly happened, I don't know. But afterward, Ruth was with child, Thomas's child. That baby was your grandmother, Eliza. Sarah felt sick, and this ... continued? For generations? The farm prospered when others failed. The family never suffered the illnesses that plagued others. And when Thomas's body began to fail in the 1960s, he didn't die. He ... transformed. took up residence in the attic. Ruth had already moved permanently to the barn decades earlier. Your grandmother maintained the rituals. Your mother too, briefly before her accident. The car crash wasn't real, was it? Sarah asked quietly. Earl looked away. Your mother tried to break the cycle. Tried to take you away when you were 8. The entities didn't allow it. Your grandmother took over your raising after that. Sarah stood abruptly. And now she expects me to continue this abomination? To subject my daughter to this? The choice is yours, Earl said. Always has been. But there are consequences either way. The entities don't surrender their claims easily. Sarah held up the metal box. I have the attic key. I need to see for myself. Earl nodded slowly. I figured as much. I'll wait here. Some things a person needs to face alone. As Sarah entered the house, the air seemed thicker, the shadows deeper despite the afternoon sun. She climbed the stairs with deliberate steps, the silver key cold in her palm. In her grandmother's bedroom, she approached the closet, pushing aside hanging dresses that still smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. At the back, a small door was set into the wall, its keyhole tarnished with age. The key slid in smoothly, as if recently oiled. The lock turned with a soft click. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Beyond lay answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Truths that might destroy whatever peace she'd managed to build in her life away from this place. But Lily's fascination with the dolls, her dreams of Thomas, the figure Sarah had seen in the cemetery, all pointed to the entities already taking an interest in the next generation of Millers. With a deep breath, Sarah opened the door and began to climb the narrow stairs to the attic. The attic stairs creaked under Sarah's weight, the wood worn smooth from what must have been decades of use despite her grandmother's insistence that the space was sealed. The air grew noticeably colder as she ascended, a mustiness giving way to an odd antiseptic smell that reminded her of hospital corridors. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly ajar. A faint light leaked around its edge, is not electric, but the flickering glow of what might be candles or oil lamps. Sarah pushed the door open slowly. The attic spread before her, far larger than she had imagined possible from the outside dimensions of the house. The peaked roof created a cathedral-like space with exposed beams from which hung dozens of mason jars filled with murky liquid. The contents of those jars made Sarah's stomach lurch, specimens of some kind, floating in preservative. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing ancient-looking volumes, their leather spines cracked with age. Tables covered with scientific equipment, microscopes, glass tubes. Bunsen burners created a laboratory atmosphere that was both archaic and somehow timeless. But it was what sat in the center of the room that drew Sarah's full attention and made her breath catch in her throat. A figure in a rocking chair, moving gently back and forth with rhythmic creaks that matched exactly what she'd heard the night before. The figure was skeletal thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that hung from its frame. Its skin was a parchment yellow, stretched tight over prominent bones. White hair, still thick despite the apparent age of its owner, was combed neatly back from a high forehead. The eyes that turned toward Sarah were milky with cataracts, yet somehow alert, in a way that defied the apparent decrepitude of the body. Sarah, the figure said, its voice a dry whisper that nonetheless carried perfectly in the still attic air. At last. Come closer, child. Let me look at you. Sarah remained frozen at the door. Thomas, she said. Not a question, but a horrified confirmation. The figure, her great-grandfather, smiled, revealing teeth that were too perfect, too white for the withered face. You know me. Good. Eliza prepared you better than I feared. What are you? Sarah demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Thomas chuckled, a sound like autumn leaves rustling. Still the Miller family, child. Just ... extended. Preserved by the blessing we received. Blessing? Sarah spat the word. You call incest and whatever ... this ... is a blessing. Thomas's expression hardened. Judge not what you don't understand. This farm has prospered for a century while others failed. The Miller blood has stayed strong while other families withered and died. The price was high, yes, but the reward greater. And what is that reward exactly? Living like this. Sarah gestured at his withered form. Hiding in an attic? Watching your own daughter and granddaughter continue your perversion? Immortality, child. Thomas leaned forward, the chair creaking ominously. Not this temporary extension, this halfway state. True immortality. The final transformation comes when enough generations have maintained the covenant, when the bloodline is pure enough. He pointed a skeletal finger toward the far corner of the attic, where Sarah now noticed a large cabinet, its doors closed. Ruth has nearly completed her transformation already. She stays in the barn by choice now. It's where she feels closest to the angel. Sarah took an involuntary step backward. My daughter will never be part of this. Thomas's milky eyes narrowed. She already is. Miller blood runs in her veins, diluted though it may be. Haven't you noticed her connection to this place already? The dolls, the dreams, the entities have noticed her. They're already reaching out. A horrible thought struck Sarah. The dolls. You made them? Thomas nodded, almost proudly. A hobby that serves a purpose. They help the children bond with the family legacy. Establish connections early. They're vessels, Sarah realized aloud. Conduits for whatever you invited into this family. Clever girl. Just like your mother. Thomas's smile faded before she tried to run, before she had to be stopped. Rage surged through Sarah, temporarily overwhelming her fear. You killed my mother? Your own great-granddaughter? Thomas shook his head. Not I. The covenant protects the family, but it also enforces its terms. Your mother sought to break those terms. The entities simply restored balance. And now you expect me to continue this? To bring Lily into it? The solstice approaches, Sarah. Another opportunity to strengthen the covenant. To move us all closer to the final transformation. Thomas leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking very tired. You can resist, as your mother did. But consider the consequences. Not just for yourself, but for your daughter. Are you threatening my child? Sarah took a step forward now, anger burning away fear. Not I, Thomas said again. But the entities we serve do not recognize modern concepts of consent or choice. They recognize blood and covenant. Your daughter is of Miller blood. She is already claimed, whether you acknowledge it or not. Sarah felt the weight of generations pressing down on her. The choices made by Thomas, perpetuated by Ruth and Eliza, nearly continued by her own mother. A cycle of abuse and manipulation justified by supernatural promises. There must be a way to end it, she said, more to herself than to Thomas. To break the covenant without harm coming to my daughter. Thomas's expression became calculating. Perhaps. The original documents contain the full terms, including methods of dissolution. But such methods come with their own price. Where are these documents? In the barn. With Ruth. Thomas smiled thinly. She guards them zealously. She is less human than I these days, more directly connected to the entities. She may not welcome your intentions. Sarah backed toward the door. I'll find a way to end this. Before you go, Thomas called, take one of the jars from the shelf beside you. See what becomes of those who interfere with Miller business. Against her better judgment, Sarah glanced at the nearest shelf. The mason jar she'd noticed earlier contained what she now recognized as preserved human tissue organs, mostly floating in yellowish liquid. One jar at eye level held what was unmistakably a human heart, a small tag attached to its seal. With trembling fingers, Sarah read the tag, James Wilkins, 1978. Trespasser. The sheriff helps maintain our privacy, Thomas explained casually. In return, the covenant's benefits extend to him and his family. An arrangement that has served all parties for generations. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. Without another word, she fled down the attic stairs, slamming the door behind her. She didn't stop running until she reached the porch where Earl still sat waiting. You knew, she accused, gasping for breath. You knew what was up there. Earl nodded solemnly. I've known since I was a boy. My father was a caretaker before me. Why help them? Why be part of this? My family has lived next to this farm for 5 generations, Miss Miller. Not one of us has ever been sick a day in our lives. My father lived to 103, his father to 98. The arrangement benefits those who support it. Sarah stared at him in disgust. I need to get into the barn to find the original covenant documents. Earl's expression turned wary. Ruth doesn't take kindly to visitors these days. She's changed more than Thomas has. I don't care. I'm ending this for my daughter's sake. For all the Miller women who never had a choice. After a long moment, Earl nodded. I'll help you get into the barn. But what you find there, don't say I didn't warn you. As they walked toward the weathered structure in the distance, the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Oklahoma farmland. Sarah thought of Mark and Lily, safe in town for now, but for how long? The entities, whatever they were, had already taken notice of her daughter.
Yes.
The barn doors loomed before them, secured by a heavy chain and padlock. Earl produced a key from his pocket. Your grandmother gave me this years ago, for emergencies. He hesitated before inserting it into the lock. Are you sure about this, Miss Miller? Some doors once opened. I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. It's time the Miller family faced the light of day. The lock opened with a reluctant click. Earl pushed one of the massive doors just wide enough for Sarah to slip through. I'll wait out here, he said. Some things a man my age shouldn't see twice in one lifetime. As Sarah stepped into the dim interior of the barn, the heavy door swung shut behind her with a finality that made her heart sink. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a sweet, cloying scent like overripe fruit. Hello, granddaughter, came a voice from the shadows. I've been waiting for you to visit me. The barn's interior was lit by shafts of late afternoon sunlight filtering through gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating dust motes that swirled in the still air. The sweet, rotting smell grew stronger as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dimness. Ruth? Sarah called, turning toward the voice that had greeted her. St. A soft laugh came from the far corner, where the light didn't reach. Yes and no. Ruth began this body, but what occupies it now is... more. Sarah took a cautious step forward, straining to see into the shadows. I want to see the original covenant documents. Thomas said they're here with you. Another laugh, this one less human than the first. Did he now? And why would you want those, I wonder? Planning to continue the family tradition? Or thinking of breaking it? I need to understand, Sarah said carefully, before I make any decisions. Understanding comes with a price, granddaughter. Something moved in the darkness, a tall, thin figure emerging into a shaft of dusty light. Sarah stifled a gasp. The creature before her had once been a woman. That much was clear from the tattered dress that hung from its frame. But any resemblance to humanity ended there. Its skin was a mottled gray-green, stretched tight over elongated limbs. The fingers were too long, ending in points that resembled claws more than nails. The face retained a vaguely feminine structure, but the eyes were solid black, without whites or pupils, and the mouth stretched unnaturally wide across the lower half of the face. You see now why I prefer the shadows, Ruth said, her voice oddly melodic despite coming from such an inhuman mouth. The transformation is nearly complete in me. Another generation, perhaps two, and the Miller bloodline will achieve what was promised. Sarah fought the urge to flee. And what exactly was promised? Thomas mentioned immortality, but this... She gestured at Ruth's transformed body. This doesn't look like a blessing to me. Ruth cocked her head at an impossible angle. Humans are so limited in their perception. This form is merely transitional. The final state is... glorious, beyond your comprehension. The creature moved to a workbench along one wall, its movements fluid yet somehow wrong, like watching an insect mimicking human motion. On the bench lay dozens of half-finished dolls, some with button eyes already sewn in, others still faceless. Beside them sat jars of human-looking teeth. Do you like my workshop? Ruth asked, running a claw-like finger along a doll that bore a striking resemblance to Lily. Thomas makes the bodies. I provide the special ingredients that allow them to serve their purpose. Sarah's revulsion must have shown on her face because Ruth laughed again. The children never notice when I take a small bit of hair, a fingernail clipping, sometimes a baby tooth. These physical connections strengthen the bond. You've been collecting pieces of my daughter, Sarah realized with horror. Of course. She's special, your Lily. The first in generations to be born outside the farm. Her blood is diluted, yes, but there's power in that, to a different kind of power. The entities are most interested in her potential. Sarah's fear was giving way to anger. Where are the documents? The original covenant? Ruth regarded her with those bottomless black eyes. Eager, aren't you? They're in my sleeping area. But a warning, granddaughter. They're protected. Only one with true Miller intent can touch them without consequences. What does that mean? True Miller intent. Intent to honor the covenant. To continue what Thomas began. Ruth's unnatural mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. Other intentions trigger certain protections. Sarah thought quickly. If I'm to make an informed choice about continuing the family legacy, I need to understand the full terms of the original agreement. That seems like true Miller intent to me. Ruth considered this, her head tilting at that unsettling angle again. Clever. Just like your mother. She tried to trick me too, you know? Before the entities took notice. My mother tried to save me from this, Sarah said. I'm trying to understand it. After a long moment, Ruth gestured toward a makeshift sleeping area in the corner, pile of hay covered with blankets, surrounded by strange symbols painted on the floor. There, she said, under the third floorboard from the left. The box contains everything Thomas signed that night. But remember my warning. Sarah approached cautiously, stepping carefully around the painted symbols. The floorboard Ruth had indicated was loose, coming up easily when she pried at its edge. Beneath lay a small iron box, its surface etched with the same symbols that decorated the floor around Ruth's nest. No lock secured it, just a simple latch. "Go ahead," Ruth encouraged, watching from several feet away. "Open it, see what your bloodline is built upon." With trembling fingers, Sarah flipped the latch and lifted the lid. Inside lay several yellowed papers, a small leather-bound book similar to the one in the safe deposit box, and what appeared to be a contract written on parchment, signed at the bottom in brown ink that Sarah instinctively knew was blood. As she reached for the contract, Ruth spoke again. "What is your intent, Sarah Miller? Speak truthfully now. The entities are listening." Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering above the document. If Ruth was right, taking these papers with the wrong intent would trigger some kind of mystical protection. But leaving them here meant never understanding the full terms of what bound her family, and potentially her daughter too, whatever entities Thomas had summoned in 1923. "My intent," Sarah said carefully, "is to ensure the Miller bloodline continues in the manner most beneficial to our family. Not a lie exactly. Breaking the covenant would certainly benefit the family more than continuing this horror." Ruth's black eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Acceptable. Take them then. Read them. Understand what Thomas sacrificed for our prosperity." Sarah gathered the papers and book, placing them carefully in her jacket pocket. "Thank you, Ruth." As she turned to leave, Ruth's voice stopped her. "One more thing, granddaughter. The covenant requires renewal on each solstice. The summer solstice passed just after Eliza died. The winter solstice approaches in December. A decision must be made by then, and if no renewal occurs—" Ruth's expression turned grave. "Then the benefits end, the protection withdraws, and the price for a century of prosperity comes due all at once." "What price?" "Everything the covenant preserved, health, prosperity, life itself, taken back with interest." Ruth gestured to herself. "Those of us in transition would not survive the withdrawal. Those still fully human would face ... consequences." "You're saying Lily would be in danger," Sarah interpreted. "The entities notice when blood that belongs to them is withheld." Ruth's voice had dropped to a whisper. "They do not forgive easily." Sarah felt cold despite the summer heat that permeated the barn. "I understand. Do you?" Ruth moved closer, her elongated limbs carrying her across the floor with unnatural speed. "Your mother thought she understood too. She thought she could outrun what flows in her veins. In your veins. In your daughter's veins." She was standing too close now, her face inches from Sarah's. The smell of decay was overwhelming. "The dolls watch, Sarah. They listen. They report. No matter where you go, the Miller blood calls to the entities. They will find you. Find Lily." With a sudden movement, Ruth reached out and grasped Sarah's wrist. Her touch was ice cold, her skin dry like old paper. "Unless you return. Unless you complete what Thomas began, what Eliza maintained, what your mother rejected." Sarah wrenched her arm away. "I'll make my decision after I've read the documents." Ruth's wide mouth curved in a grotesque approximation of a smile. "As you wish, granddaughter. But remember, the winter solstice comes, and the entities grow hungry after so long." Sarah backed toward the barn door, unwilling to turn her back on the creature that had once been her great-grandmother. When she reached it, she fumbled with the handle, finally pushing it open and stumbling into the fading daylight. Earl was waiting where she'd left him, sitting on an old tractor tire. He stood when he saw her face. "You saw her," he stated flatly. "The real her." Sarah nodded, still clutching the documents from the iron box. "What is she becoming?" Earl shook his head. "No one knows for sure. Thomas has theories. He's documented the transformation in those journals he keeps. But Ruth is further along than any Miller before her, and this is what the covenant promises? This ... mutation? That's one way to look at it," Earl said carefully. "Another is transcendence, becoming something beyond human limitations." Sarah stared back at the barn, its weathered exterior giving no hint of the horror within. "I need to read these documents, and then I need to find a way to free my family from this curse without harming my daughter." Earl nodded slowly. "If anyone can, it would be you. You were always different, stronger than the others. That's why Eliza was both proud of you and afraid of you." As they walked back toward the house, the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm. In the distance, the lights of Blackwell began to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Sarah thought of Mark and Lily, waiting for her call, expecting her to return to them with some simple explanation about family papers and inheritance. How could she possibly explain what she had discovered, what she had seen? More importantly, how could she protect her daughter from a covenant that claimed her by blood, made by ancestors whose madness and desperation had doomed generations of their descendants? The answer, she hoped, lay in the yellowed pages now burning against her skin through her jacket pocket. The original contract with all its terms, and hopefully, its weaknesses. Back in the farmhouse kitchen, Sarah spread the documents from Ruth's iron box across the table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the yellowed pages, making the handwritten text seem to shift and move in ways that disturbed her peripheral vision. The centerpiece was the covenant itself, a contract drafted in ornate, archaic language on parchment that felt unnaturally warm to the touch. Sarah read it carefully twice, trying to decipher the deliberately obfuscated terms. Thomas Miller had indeed made a pact with something he called the Angel of the Harvest, though the description of this entity in the supporting documents made it clear it was no biblical angel. The entity promised prosperity for the land, health, and extended life for the bloodline, and eventually transformation into something beyond death and life for those who maintained the covenant through sufficient generations. In exchange, the Miller family pledged to maintain blood purity through direct lineage, a euphemism for the incest that had produced 3 generations of Miller women. They also pledged regular tribute in the form of rituals conducted on the solstices and, more disturbingly, occasional sacrifices of trespassers who violated the sanctity of the Miller land. The last pages detailed the methods by which the covenant could be dissolved. Information Thomas had mentioned but Ruth had not drawn attention to. This section was complex, filled with ritual requirements and warnings, but one passage stood out. The covenant, once established, binds all of Miller blood until the final transformation or until properly dissolved. Dissolution requires the willing sacrifice of one who bears the blood but rejects the covenant, offered freely on the site of the original pact during the dark of the solstice night. Such sacrifice breaks all bonds and releases all claims, but the prosperity granted must be returned in equal measure. Sarah sat back, her mind racing. Willing sacrifice was ominously vague, but it seemed to offer a way out, a way to free Lily from this generational curse. The price would be high, but what mother wouldn't sacrifice herself for her child? The ringing of her phone startled her from these dark thoughts. Mark's name appeared on the screen. Sarah? Are you okay? It's been hours. His voice was tense with worry. I'm fine, she assured him, though she felt anything but fine. How's Lily? Asleep. The motel has a pool. She wore herself out swimming. There was a pause. Did you find what you were looking for? Sarah glanced at the document spread before her. Yes, it's single quotes S. complicated. Family history stuff, Sarah. Mark's tone shifted. Don't shut me out. Whatever this is, we face it together. I know, she said softly, and I'll explain everything. But not over the phone. Can you keep Lily in town tomorrow? I need one more day here to sort things out. Mark was silent for a moment. You're scaring me, Sarah. What did you find in that house? The truth about my family. About why I ran away at 18 and never looked back. Sarah struggled to keep her voice steady. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, I promise. But please, keep Lily away from this place for now. After extracting a promise that she would call again in the morning, Sarah ended the call and returned to the documents. The ritual for dissolving the covenant required specific preparations, components she would need to gather, and precise timing. The winter solstice was December 21st, still months away. But there was a more immediate concern. If Thomas and Ruth were to be believed, the entities were already taking an interest in Lily through the dolls. Sarah needed to sever that connection immediately. The leather-bound book from the iron box contained instructions for various rituals associated with the covenant. One section detailed the creation and purpose of the dolls. They were indeed conduits, allowing the entities to observe and influence potential new members of the bloodline. Breaking their power required destroying them in a specific way. Sarah gathered what she needed from around the house: salt, her grandmother's sewing scissors, candles from the dining room cabinet. The ritual was simple enough. Cut the doll open at the seams, remove any personal items incorporated into its stuffing in Lily's case. Likely hair or nail clippings, burn these items with specific spoken words, then bury the remains of the doll at a crossroads with salt. Before beginning, Sarah called Earl. Despite his complicity in maintaining the Miller's secret, he was the only person who might understand what she was facing. I need to destroy the dolls, she explained when he answered. All of them, but especially the one made to look like Lily. That won't sit well with Ruth, Earl cautioned. Or Thomas. The dolls are their main connection to your daughter right now. That's exactly why I need to destroy them. Where are they kept? Earl hesitated. Most are in your old bedroom closet, but Ruth keeps the most recent ones in the barn. I need to get back into the barn. Tonight. She won't let you in again so easily, Earl warned. Not if she suspects your intentions. Then I won't give her a choice, Sarah said with newfound determination. Can you meet me at the house in 20 minutes? Bring any tools that might help force entry to the barn if necessary. After hanging up, Sarah went to her old bedroom. The closet door stood slightly ajar, though she was certain it had been closed earlier. Inside, the box of dolls sat prominently on the floor, almost as if it had been placed there for her to find. Sarah lifted the lid cautiously. Dozens of button eyes stared back at her, dolls of various sizes and designs, each clearly modeled after a child. Many she didn't recognize, but some were unmistakable, herself at various ages. Her mother is a girl, and most disturbingly, several versions of Lily from infant to her current age. The newest doll, the one Lily had found yesterday, sat on top. It was an eerily perfect match for her daughter, the same blonde hair, the same blue dress Lily had worn to her school recital last month. Even the same small birthmark on its cloth neck that Lily had on her own skin. As Sarah reached for it, a sharp pain lanced through her head. For an instant she thought she heard whispers, many voices speaking in unison, their words almost but not quite comprehensible. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Sarah dizzy and nauseated. She gripped the doll firmly, ignoring the crawling sensation on her skin as she did so. Using her grandmother's sewing scissors, she carefully cut along the seams, opening the cloth body to reveal the stuffing within. Mixed with the cotton batting were several blonde hairs, a fingernail clipping, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be a baby tooth. Sarah extracted these items with tweezers, placing them on a small plate she'd brought upstairs, following the instructions in the leather book. She carried these items downstairs to the kitchen, where she lit a candle and prepared a small bowl of salt. The ritual words were in Latin, which Sarah had studied in college another way. She had unconsciously tried to understand her family's secrets. As she spoke the words and held Lily's hair and nail to the candle flame, the house around her seemed to groan. The kitchen lights flickered. From upstairs came a thud, then another, as if something heavy was moving across the floor. Sarah continued the ritual, her voice growing stronger as she burned each item and mixed the ashes with salt. The noises upstairs grew louder, more insistent. The temperature in the kitchen dropped suddenly, her breath fogging in the air despite the summer heat outside. Just as she burned the last item, the tooth, a tremendous crash came from above, followed by the sound of something heavy descending the stairs. "You shouldn't have done that, Sarah," came Thomas's voice from the stairwell. Somehow, impossibly, he had left the attic. "The entities are most displeased." Sarah grabbed the bowl of salt and ashes, backing toward the door. "Stay away from me." Thomas appeared at the base of the stairs, his withered body somehow managing to move with surprising speed. His milky eyes were now shot through with black veins, his mouth stretched too wide in a grimace of anger. "The dolls are sacred vessels," he hissed. "Generations of work, of preparation, and you destroy them on a whim?" "Not a whim," Sarah replied, continuing to back away. "A mother's right to protect her child from predators, human or otherwise." Thomas lunged forward with unexpected agility. Sarah threw the bowl of salt and ashes at him, causing him to recoil with a shriek of pain as the mixture touched his skin. It sizzled like acid where it made contact, leaving smoking patches on his parchment-like flesh. Sarah took advantage of his distraction to flee through the front door, slamming it behind her. Earl was just pulling up in his ancient pickup truck, his headlights illuminating the yard. "We need to get to the barn now," Sarah gasped as she jumped into the passenger seat. "Thomas knows what I'm doing. He'll warn Ruth," Earl nodded grimly, shifting the truck into gear and driving around to the back of the property where the barn stood dark against the night sky. He hadn't questioned her decision to destroy the dolls, Sarah noted. Perhaps he too was tired of the secrets, the unnatural arrangements that had bound the Miller family and, by extension, the entire town for generations. As they approached the barn, Sarah could see that the doors were now secured with heavy chains, more than had been there earlier in the day. "She's expecting us," Earl said, cutting the engine 100 yards away. "We'll need to be clever about this." From the truck bed, he retrieved bolt cutters, a crowbar, and most surprisingly, a shotgun. "Just in case," he said, noticing Sarah's expression. "Ruth isn't exactly human anymore, but she still remembers what buckshot feels like. Had to remind her once before, back in '82 when she got too curious about my youngest grandchild." They approached the barn cautiously, sticking to the shadows. No light showed from inside, but Sarah could feel a watchfulness emanating from the structure, a malevolent awareness that raised goose flesh on her arms. Earl worked quickly with the bolt cutters, snapping through the chains with surprising strength for a man his age. The padlock, however, resisted his efforts. "Stand back," he whispered, raising the shotgun. The blast was deafening in the night air, the lock disintegrating under the direct hit. Before the echoes had faded, Earl was pulling the barn door open just enough for them to slip inside. The interior was pitch black and eerily silent. No sign of Ruth, no movement among the shadows. The sweet, rotting smell was stronger than before, almost overwhelming. "Her nest is in the back corner," Sarah whispered, trying to orient herself in the darkness. "The dolls should be on the workbench along the east wall." Earl nodded, producing a flashlight from his pocket. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, revealing the cluttered interior of the barn. Farm equipment long unused sat rusting alongside more disturbing item stables with leather restraints. Cabinets filled with jars similar to those in the attic, and the workbench Sarah had mentioned, covered with doll-making supplies. But no Ruth, and no completed dolls. "She's moved them," Earl murmured, sweeping the flashlight beam across the empty workbench. "She must have suspected your intent." A soft laugh came from above them. Both Sarah and Earl looked up, the flashlight beam finding Ruth clinging to the rafters like some enormous insect, her elongated limbs wrapped around the wooden beams. In her arms was a bundle, the missing dolls. "Looking for these, granddaughter?" Ruth called down, her voice a sibilant hiss in the darkness. Such precious little vessels, such useful tools for the entities to watch over the newest Miller blood. "They have no claim on my daughter," Sarah called back. "I've destroyed the doll made in her image. I've broken the connection." Ruth's laugh turned into something closer to a shriek. "So confident, just like your mother. But the connection isn't in the dolls, child. It's in the blood. The dolls merely strengthen what already exists." She shifted along the rafters with inhuman grace, the bundle of dolls clutched to her transformed body. "The entities have tasted Lily's potential. They will not release her as Ellie." "Earl," Sarah whispered, "can you hit her from here?" The old man raised the shotgun, taking careful aim. "Been a while since my hunting days, but at this range, double quotes, the blast echoed through the barn, but Ruth was no longer where she had been. She moved with impossible speed, skittering along the ceiling like a spider, dropping down behind them before either could turn. Now, she chided, her black eyes gleaming in the darkness. "That's no way to treat family." With one swift movement, she knocked Earl aside, sending him crashing into a stack of old equipment. The flashlight flew from his hand, rolling across the floor and coming to rest, pointing at the barn doors, which were now closed, the bolt thrown home from the inside. Sarah backed away, her eyes darting around for a weapon, anything to defend herself. Her hand closed around a pitchfork leaning against a nearby stall. "Stay back," she warned, brandishing it before her. Ruth cocked her head at that unnatural angle. "Or what, granddaughter? You'll kill me? I'm already more than halfway to my final form. Death means little at this stage." "Then what do you want? Why not just let me take the dolls and go?" "Because you don't understand yet," Ruth said, her voice almost gentle despite its inhuman quality. "The covenant must continue. The transformation must be completed. One more generation, perhaps two, and the Miller bloodline will transcend humanity entirely." She gestured toward the bundle of dolls. "These are more than toys or spying devices. They're preparations, anchors for what comes next. Your Lily has such potential even with her diluted blood. The entities have marked her." "For what?" Sarah demanded, still holding the pitchfork defensively. "For the next phase." Ruth's wide mouth stretched in that grotesque smile again. "It's time you saw the true purpose of our family's covenant. The glorious future that awaits those of Miller blood." She moved toward a section of the barn floor that Sarah hadn't noticed before, a large trapdoor, its edges barely visible in the dim light from the fallen flashlight. "Come," Ruth beckoned. "See what lies beneath. What Thomas began building in 1923, what your grandmother continued. What awaits your daughter if you embrace your heritage." Sarah hesitated, torn between fleeing and discovering the final truth about her family's dark legacy. Behind her, Earl groaned, struggling to rise from where he had fallen. "Go," he urged weakly. "See it, then decide." With the pitchfork still gripped tightly in her hands, Sarah approached the trapdoor as Ruth pulled it open, revealing a set of stairs descending into absolute darkness. "After you, granddaughter," Ruth gestured, her elongated fingers gleaming in the faint light. "The heart of the covenant awaits." The stairs descended into darkness far deeper than should have been possible beneath a barn built on Oklahoma's soil. Sarah counted 30 steps before they leveled out into a tunnel. Its walls damp with moisture, the air thick with that same sweet rotting scent that permeated the barn above. Ruth followed close behind, her movements producing a soft chittering sound that raised the hairs on Sarah's neck. The only light came from what appeared to be bioluminescent fungi growing along the tunnel walls, casting everything in a sickly green glow. "How's this possible?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the impossibly deep subterranean passage. "This tunnel should hit groundwater or bedrock." Ruth's laugh echoed unnaturally in the confined space. "The entities provided the means. Thomas merely provided the labor, his, and that of unfortunate guests, who trespassed on Millerland over the decades. The implications made Sarah's stomach turn. How many people died to build this? Fewer than you might think. Most survived long enough to be quite productive. Ruth moved ahead, leading the way deeper into the earth. Besides, their sacrifice served a greater purpose. You'll see soon enough. The tunnel widened gradually until it opened into a vast chamber that defied all logic. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet above them, the walls curved in a perfect circle, perhaps 100 feet in diameter. The entire space was illuminated by the same phosphorescent fungi, now revealing their true nature, not fungi at all, but some kind of pulsing, organic growth that covered the walls in intricate patterns. But it was what occupied the center of the chamber that drove the breath from Sarah's lungs. A structure rose from the earthen floor, not built so much as grown, its surface the same organic material that lined the walls. It resembled a massive cocoon, 20 feet tall and nearly as wide, pulsating gently as if breathing. Round its base, smaller cocoons, dozens of them clustered like offspring around a parent. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, the pitchfork nearly slipping from her trembling hands. "The future," Ruth replied reverently. "The culmination of the covenant Thomas made a century ago." The transformation chamber. She approached the massive central cocoon, placing one elongated hand against its surface with surprising tenderness. "This one will be mine when the time comes." The smaller ones await other family members. Thomas, Eliza's preserved form, and eventually, new generations. Including Lily, Sarah realized aloud, horror washing over her. "Especially Lily," Ruth confirmed. The entities have tasted her potential through the dolls. They're quite excited about her. Sarah tightened her grip on the pitchfork. "This is insane. Talking about turning my daughter into... what? Whatever you're becoming? Something far greater." Ruth turned to face Sarah, her black eyes reflecting the greenish light. "We're not becoming monsters, child. We're becoming gods. The final transformation elevates us beyond the limitations of humanity, beyond death, beyond suffering, beyond the petty concerns that plague mortal existence." She gestured to the chamber around them. "This is the true gift of the covenant. It's not just extended life or prosperity, but transcendence. Evolution guided by beings far older than humanity, far wiser than your limited science can comprehend." Sarah struggled to process what she was seeing, what she was hearing. The grotesque transformation of Ruth's body hardly seemed like evolution, more like corruption, a perversion of humanity rather than its elevation. "And the price?" Sarah asked. "The dolls, the incest, the murders, all for this?" "Necessary steps," Ruth dismissed with a wave of her elongated fingers. The bloodline had to remain pure to be receptive to the changes. The dolls created connections with the entities from childhood, preparing each generation. And as for the occasional sacrifice, she shrugged her misshapen shoulders. No ascension comes without cost. Sarah backed away, the full horror of her family's legacy finally clear. "This ends now. It's me." Ruth tilted her head at that unnatural angle. "You still don't understand. It cannot end. The covenant binds all of Miller blood. Even if you reject it, your daughter remains claimed. The entities have marked her. They will find her wherever you hide her." "Unless I dissolve the covenant properly," Sarah countered. The original documents outlined the willing sacrifice of Miller blood, offered freely at the site of the original pact. Ruth's expression shifted, something like concern crossing her inhuman features. "You would sacrifice yourself? For what purpose? To deny your daughter her birthright? To condemn her to the limitations of humanity?" "To free her," Sarah said firmly. "To let her live a normal life, untainted by whatever madness possessed Thomas to make this covenant." Ruth was silent for a moment, studying Sarah with those fathomless black eyes. "You are more like your mother than I realized. She too was willing to die for you. But her sacrifice was incomplete. The entities rejected it because her intent was clouded by fear rather than freely given." A chill ran through Sarah. "What are you saying? My mother didn't die in a car crash?" "Oh, there was a crash," Ruth confirmed. "After the ritual failed. After the entities possessed her body and drove it off Route 177, a lesson to those who would break the covenant improperly." Sarah struggled to maintain her composure as the truth of her mother's death, her murder, sank in. "Then I'll succeed where she failed. I'll study the ritual properly. I'll ensure my intent is pure. And abandon your husband? Your child?" Ruth moved closer, her movements unsettlingly fluid. "Leave Lily motherless as you were. Is that truly your wish?" The word struck home, piercing Sarah with doubt. Would her sacrifice really free Lily or merely orphan her? Would Mark be able to protect their daughter from entities he couldn't understand or even perceive? There must be another way, Sarah said, half to herself. Ruth sensed her uncertainty. There is. Embrace your heritage. Return to the farm. Raise Lily in the Miller tradition. In time she will understand the gift being offered to her. Never, Sarah spat, backing toward the tunnel entrance. I'll find another solution. Ruth's expression hardened. Then you doom her to a half-existence, hunted by forces she cannot comprehend. The entities do not surrender their claims easily. If not through your guidance, they will reach her through other means. I'll take my chances, Sarah replied, turning to flee back up the tunnel. But Ruth moved with that impossible speed, blocking her path. Not so fast, granddaughter. If you reject the covenant, you cannot leave with knowledge of this place. The secrets must remain protected. Sarah raised the pitchfork defensively. Get out of my way, Ruth, or whatever you are now. Ruth smiled, her mouth stretching hideously wide. What I am is what Lily will become, with or without your permission. The Miller blood calls to the entities. They will answer. With a movement too quick to follow, Ruth lunged forward. Sarah thrust the pitchfork instinctively, feeling it sink into the creature's torso. But instead of blood, a thick, yellowish fluid oozed from the wound. Ruth looked down at the implement protruding from her body with something like curiosity. Interesting, she mused. I still feel pain, but it means so little now. She grasped the pitchfork handle, ignoring how the tines remained embedded in her flesh, and wrenched it from Sarah's grip. With horrifying strength, she bent the metal shaft, rendering the farm tool useless before pulling it from her body. The wounds sealed themselves almost instantly. You cannot fight what you don't understand, Ruth said, advancing slowly now. But you can join it, embrace it. Guide your daughter to her destiny. Sarah backed away, her mind racing. She had no weapons, no way past the creature that had once been her great-grandmother. The tunnel behind Ruth was her only route back to the surface, to Mark and Lily, to any hope of saving her family. A shotgun blast suddenly echoed through the chamber, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Ruth staggered forward, a look of surprise on her inhuman face. Behind her stood Earl, his shotgun still raised, smoke curling from its barrel. Run, Sarah, he shouted, pumping the shotgun for another round. Get to the surface, burn it all. Sarah didn't hesitate. As Ruth turned toward this new threat, Sarah sprinted for the tunnel, squeezing past the wounded creature. Ruth's elongated fingers snagged at her clothing, tearing her sleeve but failing to maintain their grip. Another blast echoed behind her as Sarah raced up the tunnel, taking the stairs two at a time despite the near darkness. She burst into the barn, gasping for breath, the sweet, fetid air of the chamber below replaced by the merely musty scent of the old structure. A crash echoed from below, followed by an inhuman shriek that made Sarah's blood run cold. Earl was buying her time, but she doubted he would emerge from the confrontation alive. Forcing down her guilt, Sarah focused on what needed to be done. The Covenant documents had mentioned fire as both creation and destruction, as purification. The original ritual had been conducted in this barn. Perhaps its destruction would weaken the Covenant enough for her to properly dissolve it later. The barn was old, its timbers dry from decades of Oklahoma summers. It would burn quickly. Sarah frantically searched the structure for accelerants, finding an old can of kerosene used for heaters, containers of machine oil, anything that would ensure the fire caught and spread rapidly. As she worked, dousing the base of the walls and the area around the trapdoor, another inhuman cry rose from below. Closer now. Ruth was coming. Sarah fumbled for matches, finding a book in an old toolbox near the door. Her hands trembled as she struck one, the small flame seeming inadequate for the task before her. But as she touched it to the kerosene-soaked straw near the wall, the fire caught immediately, spreading with hungry intensity. A crash announced Ruth's arrival at the top of the stairs, her form even more distorted now, bleeding that yellowish fluid from multiple wounds. Earl was nowhere to be seen. "What have you done?" Ruth shrieked, the sound barely human. The sacred site. The fire was spreading rapidly now, climbing the walls, finding the ancient rafters. Ruth lunged toward Sarah, but recoiled as flames blocked her path. Her transformed body seemed particularly vulnerable to the fire, her skin blistering where sparks touched it. "You cannot destroy what the entities have built," Ruth cried, genuine fear in her voice for the first time. "The Covenant protects it." "We'll see," Sarah replied, backing toward the door as smoke began to fill the upper part of the barn. "Perhaps fire purifies what cannot be saved." Ruth made another attempt to reach her, but the flames had created a barrier between them. The creature that had once been Ruth Miller screamed in frustration, then turned and dove back through the trapdoor, presumably to protect the cocoons below. Sarah didn't wait to see more. She fled through the barn doors into the night air, running a safe distance before turning to watch the fire take hold. The old structure was fully engulfed now, flames reaching high into the Oklahoma night, casting an orange glow across the farmland. From the farmhouse a figure emerged, Thomas somehow having made his way from the attic to the ground floor. He stood on the porch watching the barn burn, his withered face expressionless in the firelight. Sarah knew she should get to her car, drive to town, collect Mark and Lily, flee as far as possible from this cursed place. But something held her rooted to the spot, watching her family's dark legacy go up in flames. The sound came first, a deep rumbling from beneath the earth, like a massive beast awakening. Then the barn seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself as the ground beneath it gave way. A sinkhole, Sarah thought at first, but what erupted from the collapsed structure defied explanation. A massive, writhing mass burst from the earth where the barn had stood, not Ruth, not anything humanoid, but a collection of tentacle-like appendages surrounding a central mass that pulsed with bioluminescent light. It rose 30 feet into the air, silhouetted against the night sky, its movements both purposeful and alien. On the porch, Thomas fell to his knees. "The angel of the harvest," he cried, his voice carrying across the yard. "It rises." Sarah stood transfixed, horror and fascination warring within her. This was what lurked beneath the Covenant's promises? This was the entity her great-grandfather had pledged his bloodline to? The tentacled mass seemed to sense her presence. It swiveled toward her, though it had no visible eyes or sensory organs. Sarah felt a pressure in her mind, not voices exactly, but impressions, hunger, recognition, claim. "No," she whispered, backing away. "You have no claim on me. No claim on my daughter." The pressure increased, images flooding her mind. Lily transformed, evolved, transcended. Lily as something beyond human, beyond death, beyond the limitations of mortality. Lily as part of the writhing mass before her consciousness absorbed into something vast and eternal. "No!" Sarah screamed, clutching her head. The entity pulsed, its light intensifying. From within its central mass something emerged, a form that might once have been Ruth, but was now merely a component of the larger organism. The Ruth thing reached toward Sarah with limbs that stretched impossibly across the distance between them. "Join us," it called, Ruth's voice distorted as if coming through water. The Miller blood must continue its journey. Thomas had descended from the porch, moving with surprising speed toward the entity, his arms outstretched in supplication. "Take me," he begged. "I am ready for the final transformation," the entity responded, one massive tentacle wrapping around Thomas's withered form, lifting him toward the central mass. Sarah watched in horror as her great-grandfather was absorbed into the pulsating organism, his body seeming to melt into it. This was the truth behind the Covenant, not ascension or evolution, but absorption, consumption. The entity didn't elevate. It devoured. The realization broke whatever spell had held Sarah in place. She turned and ran for her car, fumbling with the keys as the pressure in her mind intensified. The entity was reaching for her mentally now, trying to compel her to return, to submit, to join the collective organism it was building from her family's flesh. As she started the engine and accelerated down the gravel driveway, Sarah caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. The entity had partially retreated into the earth, but tentacles still writhed from the pit where the barn had stood. On the porch, watching her departure, stood a figure that resembled her grandmother, Eliza, though Sarah knew her grandmother was supposedly dead and buried. The pressure in her mind faded as she put distance between herself and the farm, but Sarah knew this wasn't over. The Covenant bound all of Miller blood. The entity had marked Lily. It would come for them. The winter solstice was months away. Time enough, perhaps, to study the ritual of dissolution, to prepare a true sacrifice that would free her daughter from the Miller legacy once and for all. Time enough to end what Thomas had begun a century ago in his desperate bid for prosperity. As Sarah drove toward town, toward Mark and Lily, she made a silent vow. The Miller bloodline would end with her one way or another. Her daughter would be free to live a fully human life, untainted by the Covenant's corruption, even if that freedom cost Sarah everything. In the motel room, Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the forces that sought to claim her, the birthright that both blessed and cursed her. Mark sat by the window, watching for Sarah's return, worry etched on his face. When Sarah finally arrived, her clothes smoke-stained, her eyes haunted by what she'd witnessed, he asked no questions. He simply held her as she sobbed against his chest, her body trembling with the weight of generations of secrets finally revealed. Later, When she could speak again, she would tell him everything. Together, they would find a way to protect their daughter from the legacy of the most twisted family in Oklahoma history. Together, they would break the covenant that had claimed the Miller bloodline for a century. But for now, Sarah took comfort in the simple humanity of her husband's embrace, the sound of her daughter's peaceful breathing, and the growing distance between them and the farm where the entity waited beneath the earth, patient and eternal, hungry for the final transformation of the Miller bloodline. The entity that, even now, was sending its influence through the blood connection it shared with Lily, weaving itself into her dreams, preparing her for her inheritance. An inheritance Sarah would sacrifice anything, even her own life, to deny it.